Okay, picture this. It's 1457. A really harsh English winter has Bletsoe Castle in its grip. And echoing through these cold stone corridors, there's this sound, just raw, desperate screams. It's a 13-year-old girl.
13. Just imagine.
Inside a room, candles flickering everywhere, Lady Margaret Beaufort is in agony. Her body, she's barely more than a child herself, and it's just convulsing. Midwives are there, whispering prayers, looking grim. They know the baby's too big for her. Her hip's too narrow.
A terrifying situation.
Absolutely. But somehow, against all odds, this child tearing its way out is destined to be King Henry VII.
The man who ends the Wars of the Roses founds the Tudor dynasty, all starting right there.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the extraordinary and often deeply tragic life of Lady Margaret Beaufort. This isn't just a history lesson. We're looking at how intense personal suffering intertwined with the birth of one of England's most powerful royal lines.
It's a story about transformation, really. How this girl, forced to grow up incredibly fast, becomes this incredibly sharp political player.
All driven by this fierce devotion to a son she hardly got to know for much of his life. So let's start right at the beginning with Margaret herself. Born around May 1443. Her parents were John Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and Margaret Beauchamp. And crucially, she had royal blood.
Yes, directly from John of Gaunt, Edward III's fourth son. And that lineage, well, as you hinted, it wasn't just prestigious, it was dangerous.
Right. In 15th century England, that kind of bloodline made you either a really valuable pawn on the political chessboard,
or a thread that needed neutralizing. Margaret learned that lesson very, very early on. The Wars of the Roses were looming. This huge, brutal fight for the throne was about to tear the country apart.
And that danger hit close to home almost immediately, didn't it? With her own father.
Oh, absolutely. John Beaufort died in 1444. Margaret was barely a year old. And the official story was fever, but, well, there were whispers.
Suicide, right. After disastrous campaigns in France, he came back apparently just broken, hollow eyes and trembling hands, barely eating.
Yeah, the shame of failure, perhaps poison. We'll never know for sure. But think about that early loss, the suspicion around her father's death. How does that shape a young girl's view of power, especially royal power?
It must have made her mother incredibly pragmatic, focused on survival.
Definitely taught Margaret Beauchamp the harsh rules of the game, and you see that reflected immediately. By the time little Margaret was 6, she was betrothed.
John de la Pole, son of the Duke of Suffolk, linking two powerful families. Seems like a smart move.
It was. But politics in that era moved at lightning speed. Suffolk himself, he fell hard. Dragged off a ship in 1450, forced to kneel, hacked to death with a rusty sword, took apparently half a dozen clumsy blows.
Grim. And just like that, the betrothal, worthless.
Exactly. The lesson for Margaret and her mother was crystal clear. Survival means being ready to pivot instantly. Adaptability was everything.
So next move, another betrothal, and fast. This time to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond.
Right. Now, the Tudors were interesting. Half-brother to King Henry VI, through his mother, Catherine of Valois, let's say, controversial second marriage to Tudor.
Welsh upstarts, some might say. Not ancient nobility.
Not at all. But they had something maybe even better. The king's favor. Direct connection to Henry VI. And in that climate, that mattered more than centuries of lineage.
So this marriage, 1455, Margaret's about 12. This wasn't a love match.
Oh, absolutely not. It was pure political strategy, sealing an alliance with the Lancastrian side. It happened at Bletsoe Castle, her childhood home, but those vows tied her to this huge, demanding dynastic game.
And this is where it gets incredibly difficult and just profoundly sad. The marriage was consummated straight away.
Immediately. There was no waiting for noble girls back then. They were, as you said earlier, basically seen as, well, brood mares for the dynasty.
That wedding night must have been traumatic. She never spoke of it, but you see its shadow in her intense religious devotion later. Maybe a way to cope will find solace.
And the physical cost was immediate too. Within months, this 12, maybe 13-year-old girl is pregnant. Imagine the women around her, probably a mix of excitement for an heir, but deep, deep worry for her.
Her own mother had been 18 when Margaret was born. Seeing her own child, barely pubescent, going through pregnancy, the anxiety must have been immense.
And then more tragedy. Edmund Tudor never even saw his son. Autumn 1456, he's campaigning in Wales, gets captured at Carmarthen Castle.
And dies. Plague, maybe, or maybe killed.
It's unclear.
Yeah.
But suddenly Margaret is 13 years old, pregnant, a widow, and effectively alone as England is sliding into open civil war.
Utterly terrifying. So Edmund's younger brother, Jasper Tudor, steps in.
Yes, Jasper takes responsibility. He brings Margaret to his stronghold, Pembroke Castle in Wales, which sounds secure, but
It's basically a fortress on the edge of the known world, right? Perched on cliffs over Milford Haven.
exactly. In getting there, think about it. Winter, late pregnancy. The roads were just frozen mud ruts. Every jolt in that horse-drawn litter must have been agony. A journey that should have taken 2 days stretched to 5.
Oh.
Avoiding floods, maybe avoiding patrols from the opposing side.
Just getting there was an ordeal. And Pembroke, while offering protection, wasn't built for comfort.
Not at all. Cold, drafty, exposed. And apparently it was a particularly brutal winter that year, 1456 into 57. So she arrives exhausted, probably terrified, and heavily pregnant.
And the castle physician, a Dr. Lewis Charlton, quite experienced, trained at Oxford and Paris.
40 years experience, yeah. He examines her and he's alarmed. He tells Jasper Tudor straight up, her hips are too narrow, the baby's in a bad position.
He basically says the birth is going to be incredibly dangerous, maybe fatal for her, or the baby, or both.
It puts Jasper in an impossible position. Dr. Charlton lays out the options, try to turn the baby, which is risky for both, which also increases the risk daily, or attempt cesarean.
Which in the 15th century was almost always fatal for the mother.
Almost invariably. So Jasper, he's only about 25 himself, has to make this life or death decision. The whole future of the Tudor claim, the Lancastrian hopes maybe, rests on this 13-year-old girl and her unborn child. The pressure is immense.
But even in this darkness, Margaret starts showing incredible strength, doesn't she? A glimpse of the strategist she'd become.
She does. She uses this time stuck in Pembroke to learn. Jasper tutors her in politics, statecraft. She seems to understand even then that knowledge is power.
And she dives deep into religion, praying constantly, developing this intense personal faith. Father Meredith, the castle priest, apparently told her something like, "Prayer without action is empty, but action guided by prayer can move mountains."
A motto she seems to have lived by. And then, that night in January 1457, labor begins.
18 hours. Just imagine, 18 hours of agonizing labor for a girl that young, her screams echoing through the stone castle.
Midwives like Dame Gwen Daffod working frantically. Herbs, different positions, whispered encouragements, prayers. Jasper pacing outside knowing everything hangs in the balance.
As dawn breaks, Margaret's fading. Dr. Charlton and Dame Gwen make a desperate call. Manual extraction.
A horrific procedure. Dame Gwen prepares to reach inside. And then somehow, the baby finally comes, torn from her body.
There's this awful silence in the room for a moment.
Until this thin, angry wail cuts through the tension. Henry Tudor, future King Henry VII of England, has arrived.
But the cost, Dr. Charlton's assessment afterwards, is devastating.
Extensive tearing and internal injuries that would never fully heal. He states plainly, she would never bear another child.
At 13, her reproductive life over, sacrificed for the dynasty, her physical recovery was slow, painful, plagued by infections, and psychologically, nightmares. A fear of physical touch.
It's hard to fathom that level of trauma. But here's the thing. How does that shape you? For Margaret, her body was broken, yes, but her spirit, it seemed forged in that fire.
Unshattered is a word used to describe it.
Exactly. Because she couldn't have more children. All that fierce maternal drive, all her ambition became laser-focused on this one son. Her purpose shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about securing his future, his throne. That experience forged this iron will, this calculating mind.
And she needed it because the Wars of the Roses were now fully igniting. Safety was the immediate priority. So, what's the solution for a young, widowed, incredibly wealthy heiress with a politically significant infant son?
Marriage. Again, in 1458, barely recovered physically or emotionally, she marries Sir Henry Stafford, younger son of the Duke of Buckingham.
A much quieter affair this time, described more like a business partnership.
Very much so. Stafford was technically a Yorkist sympathizer, or at least pragmatic. The marriage offered Margaret protection for herself and her vast estates. And crucially, she negotiated a key provision.
Young Henry stayed in Wales.
Yes, under Jasper Tudor's guardianship. Separated from his mother, but safe. That decision probably saved his life multiple times over the coming years.
And Margaret starts honing her skills, navigating these incredibly dangerous political waters. You mentioned her use of female networks.
Yes, this is fascinating. She maintains correspondence somehow with both the Yorkist queen, Elizabeth Woodville, and the exiled Lancastrian queen, Margaret of Anjou, playing both sides, gathering intelligence. It required extraordinary diplomatic skill, all done discreetly.
Meanwhile, Henry's growing up in the Welsh hills, knows his mother mainly through Letters.
Letters and gifts, yes. Jasper ensured he got a solid education, not just books, but writing, swordsmanship, politics, learning Welsh, commanding loyalty, practical skills for a potential leader. Margaret existed in this state of constant worry, pouring her maternal feelings into these carefully worded, often coded messages.
And Margaret herself never stopped learning, managing estates, studying law, history, theology, building this incredible library, becoming a real scholar in her own right.
She was arming herself intellectually for the long game.
Then, 1461, the Battle of Towton, a catastrophic Lancastrian defeat, the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Edward V is firmly on the throne.
And suddenly, Margaret's position is even more precarious. Her Lancastrian blood makes her suspect. Her son, Henry, even as a young child in Wales, is a potential figurehead for dissent.
She must have lived in constant fear they'd come for him.
Absolutely. And this seems to be when her intelligence network really ramps up. Bribing clerks, paying merchants for information, cultivating spies not just in England but on the continent too. It became this sophisticated operation, all focused on protecting Henry and staying ahead of the game.
Fast forward a bit, 1469. Her husband, Henry Stafford, gets wounded fighting for the Yorkist King Edward IV.
And Margaret uses his recovery period, this time of vulnerability, brilliantly. She's nursing him, yes, but she's also subtly working on him politically, planting doubts about Edward IV, hinting at opportunities elsewhere.
Playing the long game again.
Exactly. By 1470, Stafford is persuaded. He switches sides, ready to support a Lancastrian restoration attempt.
But it all comes crashing down in 1471. The Battle of Tewkesbury, final Lancastrian defeat. Edward, Prince of Wales, the Lancastrian heir, is killed. King Henry VI dies or is killed in the Tower shortly after.
And just like that, with the main Lancastrian line extinguished, Margaret's teenage son, Henry Tudor, becomes the most senior viable Lancastrian claimant. A very distant claim through his Beaufort mother, but suddenly the only real hope left.
Which instantly makes him the most dangerous person in England to the Yorkist regime.
Precisely. So Jasper Tudor makes another drastic decision. Exile. They have to get Henry out of the country.
September 1471, a ship waiting at Tenby in Wales, 14-year-old Henry boards it and sails away.
Into 14 years of exile, mostly in Brittany, constantly watched, sometimes a guest, sometimes more like a prisoner, depending on the political winds.
And Margaret wasn't there to see him off. She gets the news days later. Imagine the shock, the fear. 14 years. She had no idea if she'd ever see him again.
A mother's nightmare. But strategically, it was the only move. And conveniently, or perhaps not so conveniently, her husband Henry Stafford also dies in 1471.
Freeing her up again. She's now nearing 30, twice widowed. Does she retire from the game?
Not a chance. Her third marriage is perhaps her most strategic yet. She marries Thomas Stanley, Lord Stanley.
One of the shrewdest, most powerful nobles in England, a man famous for keeping his options open until the very last second.
The master of the game, as he's often called. This wasn't about romance, it was a power alliance. Margaret gains access to Stanley's immense influence, his network, his military muscle. He gains her lands and connections. It's a partnership.
And through Stanley's network, she can perhaps better maintain contact with Henry in exile.
It certainly helped. They continued their secret communication coded messages, invisible inks, trusted messengers traveling back and forth. Her own intelligence network continued to operate, keeping tabs on Henry's safety in Brittany, watching for Yorkist plots against him, living with that constant fear.
And then the huge pivot point, April 1483. King Edward IV dies suddenly.
Completely unexpectedly. His son Edward V is only 12, and his uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, moves fast.
Seizes power, the princes in the Tower disappear, Richard becomes King Richard III.
A hugely controversial usurpation, and for Margaret. This is both terrifying. Richard is ruthless, but also an unprecedented opportunity.
Because Richard's actions fractured the Yorkist party, made Henry's claim look more legitimate, or at least less illegitimate by comparison.
Exactly. Richard had alienated powerful figures. Suddenly, Henry Tudor, the distant exile, looked like a potential alternative to unite the opposition.
And Margaret moves with, frankly, breathtaking speed and audacity.
She starts plotting almost immediately. Working with Bishop John Morton, another exile, she helps coordinate a major rebellion inside England. Buckingham's rebellion timed to coincide with an invasion by Henry from Brittany.
An incredibly complex plan involving multiple factions, secret communication, raising funds.
It was ambitious, but it failed. Bad weather scattered Henry's invasion fleet in October 1483. The rebellion in England collapsed. Buckingham was executed.
And Margaret, Richard III knew she was involved.
Oh yes, she only narrowly escaped execution herself. Richard placed her under house arrest, stripped her of her titles and lands, transferring them to her husband Stanley, who was ordered to keep her confined.
So sidelined. Defeated.
It looked that way, but Margaret Beaufort wasn't easily defeated. Even under house arrest, watched constantly, she kept plotting. Using trusted servants, coded messages slipped out. She was planning the next attempt. Not just Henry's return, but how he would rule successfully. Thinking steps ahead.
And her relationship with Stanley, her jailer husband, becomes key here.
Absolutely crucial. Stanley was playing his usual careful game, publicly loyal to Richard III, but Margaret was working on him, on his family. When Henry Tudor finally lands in Milford Haven in Wales in August 1485, everything hinges on the Stanleys.
And that brings us to Bosworth Field, August 22nd, 1485.
The climax. Richard III fighting desperately, Henry Tudor's smaller force, and the Stanley forces, commanded by Thomas Stanley and his brother William, watching from the sidelines, nominally there to support Richard.
But they don't intervene until the critical moment.
At the critical moment, Sir William Stanley leads his troops against Richard III, effectively sealing his fate. Richard is killed in the fighting.
A betrayal Margaret had likely spent years carefully orchestrating through her influence on her husband and his family.
It seems almost certain. The Stanley intervention won the battle and the crown for her son. Henry Tudor was King Henry VII of England.
28 years. 28 years of separation, plotting, danger, 14 of those in exile for Henry. And finally, triumph. Margaret becomes the most powerful woman in England. My lady, the king's mother.
She held immense influence, was granted significant autonomy, but that simple mother-child bond, it was gone. Stolen by years of separation and the necessities of politics. Their relationship was now formal, respectful, but unavoidably political.
She lived to see him consolidate power. Mary Elizabeth of York uniting the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York.
A masterstroke she helped engineer, and she saw the birth of her grandson, the future Henry VIII. She really saw the dynasty established.
Margaret died in 1509, just shortly after her son, Henry VII. Her life's work complete. An incredible journey from that terrified girl in Pembroke Castle.
Absolutely. The ambition, the resilience, it's extraordinary.
But the cost, as we've discussed, you can't really measure it easily. She sacrificed her physical well-being, that conventional idea of motherhood, maybe personal happiness, all for this dynastic goal. That 13-year-old girl screaming in labor had no idea the powerhouse she would become.
The king's mother. The woman whose sheer will arguably ended the Wars of the Roses, turning that maternal drive into political gold.
If you visit Westminster Abbey today, you can see her tomb. Black marble, very grand. The inscription lists her achievements. But, you can't hear the echo of that scream from Pembroke Castle all those years ago. The sound of a child in agony, bringing forth England's future. It makes you think, doesn't it? What does it mean for us to really acknowledge the hidden suffering, the personal cost behind some of history's biggest achievements? And how often, maybe, is that kind of profound personal pain the very thing that forges an extraordinary will to succeed?